Humor me. Look to your left. Look to your right. What do you see? You see smiling people, right? They're happily eating their dinner. I got 10 minutes to convince you that you're actually wrong. What you see is basically a whole bunch of microbes that are held together by a bunch of human cells. And so I'm going to try and do that. So there's been this amazing new technologies that come on in science that's allowed us to actually start to understand these microbes. And what I want to convince you is that basically you're more microbe than you are human. So where do we start with our story? Well, we already heard the 1500s. I can't go back that far. I'm going back to 1683. Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. He's beavering away. He's going to make the very first microscope. He does this, and like any good scientist, he says, well, what do we look at now? So he reaches into his mouth, scrapes out his mouth, holds it up into a little microscope. He sees all these little wiggly things he called animalcules. And he made the stunning observation there were more of these things in his mouth than all the people that lived in the Netherlands. And thus, we then basically have the birth of what we now call microbiota. So it used to be called normal flora, and you know what flora means, so we had to change the name, so we changed it to microbiota. And really, this is just the definition of all the microbes, the bacteria, the viruses, the single-celled eukaryotic cells that live in and on us. And that, when I say the word microbiota, that's what it means. So I'm talking about all the bugs that are on you. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, and it's a bit disheartening when you think you're human, when you suddenly realize these things. There's actually 10 times more microbial cells in and on you than there are human cells. So I tell my students, you're 10 times more microbes than you are humans. They don't like that so much. You encode these microbes encode 150 times more genetic genes than the human chromosome. So they have this huge genetic potential that's living in and on you. And we now sort of basically call the collection of the microbes and the human together basically a superorganism, because they're really a collection of both these things. We kind of tend to think now of these things as an organ. They basically weigh about 1.5 kilograms, basically the same size as a brain. And that's the weight of these microbes in and on us. So where are they? Well, basically they're wherever the body's exposed to the environment. So on the skin, the genital tract, for example, and most commonly in the gastrointestinal tract. Basically, as you go down the GI tract, there gets more and more. So in the large intestine, there's phenomenal numbers of these microbes in there. So what do all these critters actually do? Well, they actually do good things. This lovely dinner you're eating, you're basically not eating it for yourself, you're feeding your microbes. You're drinking for your microbes, right? They make essential vitamins. We know that they basically make things that we need to live. But despite all this, we basically ignored these critters for the last 325 odd years since Leeuwenhoek discovered these things. We knew we were there, we just couldn't do anything with them. They need oxygen to grow, so you can't just basically streak these things out on a plate and make them grow. They won't. We couldn't do that. They're really hard to grow. So then sequencing came along. You all know about genome sequencing, the amazing power of sequencing the human genome, etc. And I like to say that when the human genome sequencers finished sequencing the human genome, they looked at each other and said, well, what do we sequence next? And someone had the bright idea, well, let's go after microbes, because there's an infinite number of these things. We'll never have a loss of job. We'll always have something to sequence. So we can do that by basically going after chunks of these microbes. There's some conserved regions in these genes called 16S ribosomal genes, and you can basically put primers on these conserved regions and then amplify up the regions that are different between these microbes in between. And once you have that sequence, you can basically use that to put them on sort of the tree of life and basically identify which microbes they are without ever growing them. And we can now do this quite a lot these days, and we can now do this. So now we can actually identify what all the microbes are based on this sequencing in and on us. And each of you, we have between 500 and 1,000 microbial species happily living in your gut, saying, feed me more, please, as the night goes on. And so the other neat thing is we're all different. Homo sapien genes are 99.99% identical. We're very similar, except for the chromosomal difference between male and female. But we each have a unique set of microbial species that makes us actually quite unique. So in the past 5 years, this has been a very, very active area of research. And it's just really changing the whole landscape in many areas of biology. What we are realizing, the microbes play a key role in both our normal development and disease. We know they're absolutely essential for immune system to develop properly. We have things called germ-free animals, which are basically microbe-free animals. Their immune systems don't develop. And even more stunningly, their brains don't develop normally. They don't need those microbes to allow their brain to develop, and you'll see that'll come in later. However, there's a dark side to these critters too. And what we're finding is these microbes are playing a role in many diseases that we commonly thought were sort of a 21st century developed country diseases. This curve is my favorite curve. On the left is infectious diseases. They're all going down over the last 50 years. That makes sense, right? We've cleaned up the water, we've got vaccines, et cetera. And I work on infectious diseases, so I took one look at this curve and said, I better find something else to work on. So I'm going to go work on the right-hand side of that curve there. And on that curve, this is only 50 years. Look at the stunning rises in MS, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes, asthma. It's just going through the roof. And the question is, why? And ironically, we're starting to realize the microbes are playing a big role as we shift our world we live in, and these microbes are contributing to it. So I'll just take a slight detour and tell you about some exciting work we're now doing on asthma. You know, asthma is one of those ones that's just going through the roof. When I was a kid, no one had asthma. Now I go to the playground, basically the kid runs up a slide, shares his puffer with his neighbor's kid who runs up the slide, and a quarter of all kids have asthma. How come? We haven't genetically changed in that period. And work in our lab and others now actually is profoundly showing that the gut microbiota are actually affecting how our immune system develops, which translates to asthma. We've now identified bugs that we think are protective to this. So we actually have a joke in this field, in the microbiota field, what isn't caused by the microbiota? Not that we have egos or anything. And so the world is working feverishly in all these areas, and then it's just all sorts of cool data is coming out every day in this area. So that takes us to the CIFAR graph. What are we going to do that's big, bold, and et cetera? So this is the title of it, Microbes in Humans, the Role of Microbiota in Human Development, Evolution, and Society. So, as I said, there's a lot of people working in individual diseases, et cetera, and as well health, but this CIFAR, like all CIFAR programs, wants to go way beyond this, to boldly go where no human has gone before. Basically, we're going to take this really outside-the-box type idea and venture into really an uncharted and unexplored area. And of course, this could really only be done under the confines of a CIFAR-type program, because if I wrote this grant anywhere else, there's no way that such a bold and innovative and rather interesting idea would ever get funded. So we're now just realized the microbiota has a profound effect on human development and actually even our behavior. So we need to rethink how we think of ourselves, and really we're a collection of us and our microbes. I'm trying to convince you of this. This is something called the hologenome. That's where all the microbes' genes and our genes as well. So you're born, you have a set of DNA. You are going to die with that DNA. As hard as you try, you are not going to evolve in a lifetime. You can't do that. Basically, your DNA doesn't change. But what about all the bugs in and on us? These things change rapidly. We know in childhood they change, in pregnancy they change, in old age they change. These microbes are changing. So your genetic potential is actually changing, even though Homo sapiens DNA isn't. So that brings up some really interesting concepts. For example, what happens if there's a plague? It's in the microbes' best interest to keep us alive, right, or a pandemic. So maybe they change to allow us to live through this, and genetically, we as Homo sapiens can then catch up generations down the line. So one of the neat concepts we have is we have someone that's basically digging up skulls in Italian graveyards going back to the 4th century. And you can scrape out the dental plaque, and you can then amplify the bugs, and you correlate how do those correlate when, say, pandemic plagues roared through that particular village. And we can correlate this and see these changes going on. So even twin studies say that there's what we call a heritable microbiome. When a kid is born, the mother passes on the maternal genes and paternal genes to that kid, right? Well, they also pass on the microbes. So you're actually passing on these microbes as sort of a genetic type inheritance to these things. So this area is going to tackle these 3 big areas, and I'm just going to briefly go through each of these. So human development. We now realize, I was always taught the fetus was sterile. We now realize it's not. There's actually microbes there. And we also know that the microbes in the gut make all these metabolites that go into the feces and actually affect development. Early childhood, there's all sorts of stunning results coming out that the microbiota play a big role in how we develop in childhood. I've already told you about the immune system and even brain development. Are there bugs that affect IQ? We don't know this. We are going to go looking. So that's development. And there's evolution. So we're now starting to get a little more risky in terms of concepts here. Can the microbiota play a role in human evolution? I've already described this whole genome concept, that these microbes can basically give you an enhanced fitness, and they can adapt to the changing environment, which basically allows us to evolve more. And rapid changes to environmental stress and changes can actually be used by these microbes. Could we have a selfish microbe that's actually driving our evolution? We think we're evolving as humans. Maybe the microbes have a grander plan, and they're saying, no, we should evolve to go eat Big Macs and make my microbes really happy and things like this. Maybe. It's an interesting concept. And then the third area is society. And if I ever thought I was going to stand up in front of people and talk about microbes and their effect on society, I never envisioned that one. So, can the microbes actually affect anthropology? We know the microbiota can affect behavioral changes. This we know. So at least in mice, we know that you can actually change the behavior of mice by altering the microbiota. Could they change a human behavior? We change our eating habits. We change our microbes. Do they change us? All sorts of societal effects. Breastfeeding, for example, change your microbes versus bottle-fed. Cesarean sections versus vaginal delivery cause drastic changes in the microbiota. Could this actually affect how we evolve as a society? Antibiotic use, fermented foods, these all impact on microbes, which may actually affect us as we evolve as a society. And of course, there's cultural changes, and these things impact on the microbes, which may then have an effect on society. So this is obviously a very interdisciplinary type thing, which is going to require expertise from all sorts of people. So it's a really interesting new area. It's a bold area. No one's ever gone in this area before. We're going to learn a lot about human development from what the microbes do. This has never been looked at before. And even evolution in this whole new light. And we'll come to the realization the microbes may actually affect our evolution and even future evolution of our societies in this role. So we're going to need a whole bunch of expertise, and some of the people we recruit include like social anthropologists, people working on primate behavior, et cetera, social historians. If I ever thought I'd be talking to a social historian, you'd say I'm crazy, but they come to play in this. So, I think that this group will be a really interesting group to get together. The other nice thing is that it's going to impact closely with other CIFAR programs already funded. There's a child and brain development. Well, you can see the analogies there because we're now realizing the microbes play a role in brain development. And there's another program called Integrated Microbial Diversity. They study microbes in different environments, while a human is just a different environment. So there's obviously parallels there. So I really think this will really transform our concepts of biology and human evolution with all sorts of impacts on potential in humanity. So I started the talk with you looking at each of your neighbors here. So as I conclude here, have another look. Did they look the same? Did you see any microbes on these guys? Thank you very much.